It began with a scream that tore through the dry air like a bullet, splitting silence. Somewhere, beyond the cracked horizon, a woman cried out, and the town turned its head. By the time the sound reached the auction square, the story had already been written by gossip and greed. People gathered, traders, drifters, wives with folded arms, all waiting for the next name to be called, the next soul to be sold. The world in that moment was all dust and judgment. The woman they brought forward was not what the crowd expected. She was large, her frame full and round beneath a red native bridal gown that shimmered faintly under the harsh noon sun. Her face, though weary, carried a strange dignity, like a queen who had long ago stopped waiting to be recognized. She was 30, perhaps a little older, and her silence made the air around her ache. The men muttered, some mocking her weight, others whispering that she had once been promised to a warrior who never returned. Whatever her story, no one here wanted to hear it, only to measure it, price it, and forget it. The auctioneer's voice rose, slick with authority. He treated her name as though it were an inconvenience. $5, he called. Then 3. Then 1. Each drop in value was a slice across her soul. No one moved. Even the wind seemed embarrassed. She stood there still as a post, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the crowd, where the desert met the sky. The humiliation was not new to her. It was an old wound reopened, familiar and cruel. Then he stepped forward. The cowboy was not the kind of man who drew attention. 35, sun-scarred and quiet. He wore the look of someone who had seen too much and spoken too little. His name was whispered later, but that day it didn't matter. What mattered was the way he looked at her, not with pity, not with curiosity, but with a kind of heavy stillness, as if he'd stumbled upon something sacred he didn't understand. When he raised his hand, the crowd laughed, mistaking mercy for madness. The hammer fell, and the deal was done. She did not thank him. He did not expect it. They left the town under a sky bruised with the coming dusk. The wagon creaked behind his horse as the woman sat inside, staring at the trail dust that rose and disappeared into the wind. The air between them was thick with silence. He offered her water once. She refused. When the ranch finally came into view, a lonely stretch of land pressed against the edge of nowhere, she said nothing. He pointed to the small house, the barn, the corral, then turned away as if ashamed of his own awkwardness. For days, they lived like shadows sharing the same light. She worked the kitchen, the garden, the hens, always quiet, always deliberate. Her movements were heavy but graceful, the way the earth moves, slow, certain, and alive. At night she hummed low songs that didn't belong to this land. He listened from his chair by the window, unsure why the sound hurt and healed him at once. He'd bought her to save her from the cruelty of men who would have broken her faster, but he hadn't planned for what came next. The way she began to fill the empty spaces of his home, her presence softening the hard edges of his loneliness. Still, he didn't speak of it. His grief was a silent companion, and he wasn't ready to let it go. Then one morning, she came back from the creek with a bruise on her arm, a mark shaped like a man's grip. He didn't ask, she didn't tell. But later, when he rode into town for supplies, he found the answer waiting. 2 men on the porch of the saloon were laughing about a wild squaw who'd fought back when they tried to remind her she wasn't free. Their laughter stopped when they saw his eyes. He didn't speak. He just looked at them, long enough for their smiles to crack and fade. That night, the ranch was quiet. She was sitting by the fire, mending a torn sleeve. He placed a sack of flour on the table, then sat across from her, hands still trembling. The flames painted her face in soft gold. "You're safe here," he said finally, his voice rough as gravel. She looked up, eyes unreadable. Safe is not the same as free. The words hung between them like smoke, curling, vanishing, lingering all the same. He wanted to answer, but nothing he could say would sound right. He realized in that quiet ache that the woman he'd bought was stronger than he'd ever been. Outside, the wind shifted, a low, mournful sound carrying across the plains. Somewhere a door creaked open, though no one had touched it. The fire flickered, and he thought for just a moment that freedom might not be something either of them could own. and in the reflection of her eyes, he saw his own captivity staring back. The storm came without warning. One moment the world was still, the next it was breaking apart. Wind howled through the canyons, tearing shingles from the roof and flinging them into the night. The first strike of lightning split a tree clean in half, setting it ablaze before the thunder even reached them. The cowboy burst from his chair, boots pounding the floor, heart already racing toward the barn. Inside that barn were the horses, the only thing he still owned that the past hadn't taken from him. But when he opened the door, smoke rolled out like an angry spirit. She was already there. Her red dress clung to her in the rain, her hair plastered to her face, eyes wild with determination. Without a word, she hoisted a barrel of water and doused the flames clawing up the wall. He shouted for her to move, but she ignored him, dragging another bucket through the mud, coughing through the smoke until her lungs wheezed like old bellows. Together they fought the fire with what little they had: water, dirt, sheer will. When it was over, the barn still stood, scarred but breathing. He found her sitting in the mud, chest heaving, eyes closed as if she'd fallen into prayer. The storm eased into silence, the world trembling with the echo of survival. He knelt beside her, wanting to thank her, but the words tangled and fell useless between them. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze with something fierce and tired, the look of a woman who'd saved herself long before anyone tried to. They said nothing. The rain spoke for them, soft and steady, washing the soot from their faces. When he helped her to her feet, she didn't resist. Their hands met, his rough, hers warm despite the cold. And for a fleeting second, the air changed. Something unseen shifted, something that didn't belong to either of them alone. By morning, the storm had passed. The sky was rinsed clean, and the land smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. She brewed coffee by the fire, humming one of her low songs. He watched her quietly, wondering how it was possible that he'd known her voice for only weeks, but felt it deep in the places memory lives. When he finally spoke, his words came slow. "You could have died out there." She didn't turn. "So could you." Her tone wasn't sharp, just honest. He almost smiled. The truth of it sat heavy in the room. He realized he'd stopped thinking of her as someone he'd saved. Somewhere between the dust and the storm, she had become the one saving him from silence, from emptiness, from the kind of loneliness that eats men alive. Later, as they mended the broken fence, she began to speak. Not of herself, but of the world she'd lost, her people scattered. Her tribe vanished into the edges of the frontier. She spoke of hunger, of cold nights, of being traded like corn and rope. Her voice did not tremble. It flowed calm and clean, carrying grief like a river that had learned how to keep moving. He listened without interrupting. For once, words seemed small, unfit for the size of what she carried. When she finished, he simply said, "You're strong." She looked at him, unblinking. "I was just never given the choice to be weak." That struck him harder than he expected. He turned away, pretending to fix the rope, but his throat felt tight. She had said it so plainly, not as pride, but as fact. And in that moment, he understood that her strength wasn't what drew him. It was the quiet endurance beneath it. Days folded into weeks. They worked together in silence that no longer felt empty. The ranch began to look like a place where something good might grow again. He caught himself waiting for her laughter, craving it like warmth. She began leaving him small things, bread wrapped in cloth, a bead repaired from her gown, tokens of care disguised as routine. Neither spoke of it. Some truths didn't need names. But peace in the West was a fragile thing. One evening, as dusk bled into night, riders appeared on the ridge, men from town, drunk on power and cruelty. They came shouting, mocking, demanding to see the red wife. He stepped outside, rifle steady in his hand, heart hammering but calm. The men laughed, calling him a fool, calling her worse. She appeared behind him, not hiding, standing tall in her red gown like a flame refusing to bow to the wind. Something passed between them then, not words, not promises, just a shared certainty. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The riders hesitated, their jeers faltering as if the sight of her unsettled them. Then, slowly, They turned and rode off into the darkness, their laughter thin and nervous. When it was quiet again, he exhaled and lowered the rifle. She placed her hand on his arm, steady, grounding. "They'll be back," she whispered. He looked at her, really looked. The storm had burned through him, and what remained was clarity. "Then so will I," he said. And for the first time, she smiled, not the polite kind, but something whole, unguarded, almost luminous. Outside, thunder rolled again in the distance, a low promise carried on the wind.